now I have to live up to that, as you know, and in Australia, that's not a good thing, right? The whole tall poppy syndrome.
Yeah, pretty much.
So somebody's got to cut me down a couple of notches now before everybody starts coming after me. But a little bit about myself. I've been doing this for about 20 years. Loosely defined, this is the identification of hard-to-find talent. And as of the last probably 10 years or so, not just the identification, but also the first component of engagement, which is to really get them interested in responding. So it's a little bit of internet research, it's a little bit of science, it's a little bit of magic, it's a little bit of psychology and persuasive communication, influencing to try to get people to respond. And that's kind of all mixed up together now in this role that is globally being recognized as the sourcing role. I like to refer to what my business is and what we do is finding impossible talent to find. So we find the talent that no one else can find. We find impossible talent. And in that, we help organizations of all different sorts, from staffing firms to enterprise corporations, RPOs, and retained search firms, when they get stuck and are having a really tough time identifying someone and getting them to respond, or getting them to respond, either or. We get involved from a couple of different points of view. For example, we help provide them some education and learning so they can learn how to do this for themselves, in that we are the #1 source of sourcing intelligence and techniques in the world. We've been doing that for 20 years. And also we get involved in lending an arm sometimes, or 2 arms, or maybe some fingers and a keyboard or whatever, and jump in and do some of the work for them in a contractual kind of staff augmentation sort of way, where we help by doing lead generation or outreach for those companies. So 20 years ago, I jumped ship from returning from government service and tried to enter the employment space and get a real job, as my mom would say. And during that time, I had a really hard time finding employment until about 3 months into my journey, when I met someone that worked for a staffing firm. And that's how by literally bumping into them at a pool tournament, I ended up being recruited into the world of recruiting and became the source or the recruiter that I am today. So that brings me to today. What we talked about today, presenting to you guys and showing you, are a couple of quick hits, some things that you can do to walk away with interesting results that you may not have potentially considered in the past. One of the techniques that I like to implement is a technique of analyzing patterns, or trying to identify patterns in research. And by trying to identify patterns, one of the best ways to do it is through word analysis or word cloud analysis. So I use this website called writewords.org.uk. You may also be familiar perhaps with wordle.net. That's another one that's out there. But I've grown partial to WriteWords, and I'll show you why. Wordle, although it makes a very pretty graphic, a very pretty image, and it does a really good job of that, it doesn't make it easy to extract the results. So for that reason, I've turned to WriteWords. In here, on the writewords.org.uk website, you go to the bottom and you'll see something that says Articles and Tools. And there, by clicking on that, you'll notice that there's a word frequency counter and a phrase frequency counter. Now, both of these are very useful for each in their own way. In order to use either of them, though, the first thing that you need to have is a collection of resumes. So we need to find, ideally, 3, if not possibly as many as 5 resumes that are, or CVs or vitaes or whatever you want to call them, that are representative of the ideal candidate. In other words, we want to find at least 3 of the types of people that the hiring manager wants to hire. These could be individuals that are currently in the role, incumbents. This could be people that are peers to the vacancy that is currently available. These could be formerly employed in this role, or these could be perhaps people that a hiring manager has worked with in the past at some point and are no longer there, or maybe from a previous company or something like that.
Shally, can I ask you, is there have you found there's a perfect number of CVs that you would use? Because clearly you need enough to give you those insights, but then perhaps if you use too many, you're picking up things that aren't necessarily relevant.
Well, 3 to 5 is a good number. Anything less than 3, very, very difficult to identify any kind of patterns. And what we're really looking for here are patterns.
Yes.
So if it's less than 3, statistically, you're not going to be able to, extract anything of any significance. 2 resumes may coincidentally have one word in common, or none at all, for example. And sometimes phrases, even less so. So ideally 3 to 5. Now, as far as too many, I would say probably once you approach about 8, if you have 8 similar resumes of people that are, again, these need to be very homogenous. We're talking about people that are in the same job function. So I'm not talking about 8 different resumes from 8 different jobs and different industries, but 8 of the same. Statistical theory will say that if you really truly have a genuinely unique and randomly selected sample of 8, you can represent any pattern accurately. Now, the trick to that is that it's nearly impossible to have a completely random sample. There's always some form of bias. And in this case, the bias is actually good, because what we're looking for in part is hidden bias. And that hidden bias could be negative bias or it could be positive bias. We want to identify the positive bias. In other words, we want to identify macro patterns in common between these profiles that we never considered in the past. And these could be simple phrases. So that's what I wanted to show you now. Of most interest to me is the phrase frequency counter, which is a key reason why I don't use word cloud tools anymore, because the phrases are a lot more indicative of patterns than individual words that can be almost taken out of context. So I go into the phrase frequency counter here, and I'll usually start with 2, although you can do 3 word phrases. 2 is typically enough. When 2 words are adjacent to each other, that's enough indication that it's a pattern. Why don't we go ahead and do a live example? You said you had a brand new search. What kind of people are you looking for in this new assignment?
Well, I mean, a good one, maybe we work on something that I've already been working on before, because it will help me just to see perhaps some of the differences. But I'm working with a consultancy that's doing operating model transformation. So like taking an HR function, for example, and looking for ways to improve how that function works. So, that's one of the areas where if you put in things like HR transformation, you're going to get lots and lots of hits. But it's really about someone transforming the HR function's operating model, and that's very specific. And if you got something if you had a phrase like that, it'd be ideal in someone's profile.
So it would be similar to operating model transformation, or are there any other?
Yeah, it'd be like the HR function transformation, or HR function improvement, or it's all about taking how they run that business function and make it better.
Now, unfortunately, I am taking notes in the very same place where I would be pasting the information. So forgive me for a second here, but the exercise that I'm going right now is something that I normally would do on a notepad, or I would handwrite it in a notebook as I'm having a conversation with the hiring manager. I would keep track of it in Evernote or something similar to that and make some notes, and then I would go out and conduct some research. But with something as simple as function transformation or function improvement, You actually can tie these together using very simple math. For example, here, function, transformation, or improvement, as well as operating model transformation. So we can have operating model like that, and that would be operating model or function, transformation, or improvement. That includes all of what you just described. Now, in this particular case, because you are looking specifically in Australia, we have the advantage of being able to add the top-level domain for Australia right there to limit our search results to only Australia. We could very easily convert this to a search in Singapore by adding SG, and of course any other country that has its own top-level domain, which you could switch this to be JP for Japan and so on. So we'll do AU for Australia, and then we'll add our phrases with the operating model or function and transformation or improvement. And then a little trick that I learned, that I figured out how to do, which is if you use the phrase 400 million other professionals, at the end, it'll limit your results to only profiles, and you won't get any job postings or any other kind of interesting things. So
Shally, why that phrase?
The reason for that is taking advantage of LinkedIn's own self-preservation mechanism, which is to say that if you were to look at this particular profile as an anonymous browser, if you were to open, say, for example, an incognito or anonymous browsing window, you would see what the search engine sees. And what the search engine sees when they look at a profile is an advertisement that quite clearly says your colleagues, classmates, and 400 million other professionals are on LinkedIn. And these ads appear only on free profiles that are publicly visible to search engines. If you were instead to take that address and use not a private browsing, or you would just use your regular browser, it would actually log you in. It would read your cookies and know that you're a LinkedIn member, which in my opinion is a huge violation of privacy, and drop you right into LinkedIn's profile where you would actually see this person's profile. You can see that's very different than the one that we just saw externally. The external search, however, or that result that you saw in the private browsing, is all that Google sees. Google does not see this because Google cannot log in as me or as anyone really. Google just crawls the public web. So LinkedIn is doing a bait and switch tactic here where they're showing Google that other version and you and I this version. But what matters to us is the version Google sees, which has that advertisement in it.
So what is the advantage of seeing those profiles versus the ones that I would see with my LinkedIn recruiter profile?
One of the biggest advantages is that a lot of people choose or opt not to have their profile findable or searchable within LinkedIn. It's a setting in the privacy configuration, and it's an independent setting that you can choose for yourself, where you can go in and you can say, I don't want to be found by people conducting keyword searches on LinkedIn. That setting removes your profile from being able to be viewed by LinkedIn users. However, by the same token, because LinkedIn has a self-preservation instinct, they want those profiles to be indexed by Google, and to do so, they have to reveal them publicly. So even though the user has checked the box that says, don't show me in internal LinkedIn search results, they never check the box that says, also don't show me in external public search results. Some people are wise to that and check that box, in which case you wouldn't see them either place, but most people only look at the internal, not realizing that there's that other option. Therefore, we can actually see people through this technique that we are not able to see in LinkedIn Recruiter, or really while we're logged into LinkedIn at all, because of that user's personal privacy settings, as it should be. What you want to do is you want to begin with the summary. You don't need the stuff at the top here. You begin with the summary and you gather summary, experience, and skills, and possibly education, but really you want to stop there. And we're going to take that and we're going to go to the right words, and we're just going to simply paste it there. And once we have 3 of these, then we would submit this search and actually go and take the next step. So all 4 of them in one big, giant block of text. And then we click the submit button. And here's where the magic starts to happen. Obviously, the first phrase you're going to get lots of is Sydney, Australia, because every single one of those profiles, by definition, since we were looking for people in Sydney, is going to have that phrase. Other phrases that you might notice are going to be, redundant, University of, or of Sydney. But here we go, human resources, capital, design thinking. Interesting, I wouldn't have thought of that, but let's grab that. It may or may not turn out to be good. Talent management, that's one that I had not considered. But again, sometimes this is what happens is, in retrospect, these almost look obvious, right? A lot of these phrases seem really innocuous. Mm-hmm. They almost would slip past our notice. But their strength is in their patterns. They appear in all 4 of the examples that we provided. With this alone, if we then, I'm just going to show you this. I've never done this before with this particular example. I just grabbed those phrases: human resources, team members, human capital, design thinking, talent management, workforce planning, people culture, and organizational design. Interesting, right? Mm-hmm. 81 results. Notice I didn't say LinkedIn. I didn't say resume or CV. I didn't say profile. Just these phrases, and I'm getting LinkedIn resumes. I'm getting white papers and academic papers. I'm getting exactly the kind of information that I want. Bios, agendas from speaking events or conferences or etc.
Yes.
Very accurate results. If you started digging through these, HRO today, that makes a lot of sense, right? Human capital business partner. So some of these are conferences, some of these are academics, some of these may be, occasionally you might see an advertisement in there or 2, but more than likely, just a small handful of them. Yep, it's inductive reasoning, and it is a diagnostic or but maybe a better word for it would be a problem-solving tool that helps us arrive at the most probable as opposed to the correct answer. So the fallacy with recruiting is that there is, when you take the specs from a hiring manager, they believe that there is going to be a perfect candidate. Well, there isn't ever such a thing. There never is a perfect candidate. There's perfection, doesn't exist in this field. So what we need to do is get to the closest possible match, which is what, if you take a look at the advancements made in artificial intelligence, it's the biggest gap that has prevented us from moving forward with a truly artificial intelligent application or software. And what Watson does is it mimics, it comes close to what humans do in inductive reasoning. It is simply trying to take a best guess given the evidence presented. And it has a confidence rating on that best guess. The confidence may be very high, and in this case, our confidence is very high. We could eliminate 1 or 2 more phrases, and our confidence would be lower, and we would have more data points or more results. But it might not be as accurate because our confidence would be lower. However, none of these are perfect. None of these are going to be the spot-on match. And when you use keyword searches and you try to get a machine to find results against a set of criteria, that machine is going to bring you back exactly what you asked for. If you ask for the wrong thing, it will bring you that back. The culture changes the language, and it's almost imperceptible while you're in the midst of it. But to people that are in this business, if you were to ask the perfect candidate, which of course we just identified doesn't exist, but if you were to ask someone that was near perfection to describe themselves, they would use some of these words and you would just gloss over and not pick up on it. Because, and the reason they're using these words is because these are the words that they've learned to use in that environment. So the environment has affected the language. The environment where they work, the things that they do, the people that they work with, has educated their vocabulary. And so they write in that same way when they describe what they do. In other words, they never started out talking or writing like this. They grew into using these words, into using this language, because they evolved in that profession. And that's why with what looks like just 5 phrases, we only get 81 results. LinkedIn, for example, is a homogeneous database, but it's not finite. In other words, everything in LinkedIn is a profile, but there could be content that's being generated right this second that I could do a search right now, and 5 seconds later do the exact same search and find something I didn't find 5 seconds ago, because that content just appeared. And now multiply that times the vastness of the internet and unhomogeneous data, besides LinkedIn and every other social network and every web page and blog post that's out there. It's simply impossible to search using the old-fashioned technique of including your search terms. You have to use a differential analysis or a differential diagnostic, essentially, with this method in order to get to the data that you want. So inductive reasoning and differential analysis is the only way forward. It's just simply too much data. But we still have the primary decision engine is still going to be us. So, IBM Watson might be able to give you 10 websites to look at, but you still have to look at the 10 websites. It's going to narrow down the world of 10 billion websites to 10 choices that you can look at. But you still need a human to look at those 10.
Great tools that could be developed along the way to help
Oh yeah,
you with the process.
absolutely. I'm working on some myself. I am actually in the midst of experimenting with this. But they're accelerators. They're like in any other job. They're tools, right? They're tools that help us do our job faster, more efficiently, more cost effectively, with higher accuracy. But they're never gonna. The tool doesn't do the job. You still need a craftsman to use the tool.
I really want to thank you for your extensive session there. It was some fantastic sharing of some great knowledge. So I had just one more question for you, which is online training. Is it as effective as the face-to-face type training?
Actually, it's more effective, but it really helps to define what online training is. So what studies have found and what research has proven, the reason that you see so much academic effort going into universities putting their courses online is that it is actually more effective. The typical average absorption or retention rate of information with a lecture in person is about 30%. What we find is that when we combine both models, the stage model, vis-a-vis the expert that sits at the lectern and pumps their fist and dictates this is how it should be done. When you combine that with the guide on the side model, where you have a coach that is passively demonstrating things, where you can go in and take and reapply them and play them back over and over and over again, the retention rate is much higher. So what we found is that the online curriculum has a much higher retention rate than the in-person courses over time. Now, I will preface that by saying that you do need to combine both. It's not a either or approach. If you have a lecture, you can have good success, and you can have some master trainers that can do a fantastic job of transferring knowledge in that setting. And you can also have online courses that, of course, the opposite, right? That are nothing but a recorded webinar. And if you have nothing but a recorded webinar, all alone with nothing else to support it, it's not going to be successful either. So it's a combination of both. What we find is that the online courses allow adults to experiment at their own pace, stop, rewind, play back. What did he say? Click on something and interact, and explore for themselves and find what works for them without being told what to do. They're learning, but they're not being told. So that in that setting, they are free to experiment and move backwards and forwards without any shame. Not that there is shame in a classroom, But unfortunately, many of us, when we went to school, were told, be quiet, don't raise your hand, don't ask any questions. And so a lot of what happens is in a classroom setting, many people that would like to ask a question simply don't because they don't want to look stupid, which they're not. No matter how many times you tell them, please ask questions, it's very important that you do, they still withhold because they don't want to appear to not be getting the material in front of their peers. But in an online curriculum, they can replay it 50 times without anybody shaming them. Not that anybody would, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. So somebody then registering with your online course would be able to, there's an interactive element as well. They can communicate with you guys at the Sourcing Institute and, take it further beyond the training.
Exactly. That's right. They have access to live chat with an instructor. We have practice sessions where we go live and work on actual requisitions. And that combined with the fully interactive courses. Again, I stress the fact that these are fully interactive. We're not talking about a recorded webinar here. We're talking about, real experiences and humor and examples and anecdotes. That makes a huge difference.
Wonderful. That sounds fantastic. Well, I think we're at the end of our time now. So, Shally, I want to thank you, and thank you also, Dan. And it's been wonderful talking with you guys. And I guess I look forward to catching up with you again sometime in the future. And so, thank you to the audience for listening today. And if you have any questions, please do send them through on chat or click through on the links below for either connections with Dan and Infinity people in Australia, with myself, or with Shally and the Sourcing Institute. And we'll be all more than happy to answer any questions that you have about today's subjects. So, so thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Barry.
Yeah, cheers, guys.